grandfather raped my biological mom, so they are not sure if my sister is grandpa's or dad's kid. Then got pregnant with me 3 months after having said sister. I was born early due to drug use and almost died. Sister was born in January and I in November of the same year. Never knew until 27 years later, and sister still doesn't know. Both parents have died due to drugs, and I don't think it will help her mental stability by knowing. The silence in our small apartment was a heavy blanket, woven with the unspoken and the unsaid. It was a silence that had settled in after Mom and Dad were gone. A silence that clung to the worn armchair where Dad used to sit. A silence that echoed in the empty spaces on the walls where their smiling faces used to hang. My sister, Enya, was a creature of this silence. She moved through our days with a quiet grace, her laughter, when it came, a fragile bird's song in the muted air. I watched her, always, with a fierce, protective instinct that had solidified in the crucible of our parents' addiction and their subsequent departure from this world. Their absence had left a gaping wound, one that I, as the older sister by a mere 11 months, felt an overwhelming responsibility to mend, or at least, to shield Enya from further tearing. Our lives had been a tapestry of hushed tones and averted gazes, a consequence of the shadows that had stretched long and dark over our childhood. The whispers of their struggles with drugs were a constant hum beneath the surface of our existence, a background noise that had shaped our every reality. Even now, years later, the scent of stale cigarette smoke or the sight of a discarded needle on the street could send a jolt of unease through me, a visceral reminder of the precariousness of our past. Enya, bless her heart, seemed to navigate these memories with a serene detachment, a testament to her inherent optimism, or perhaps a deeper, more layered coping mechanism than I possessed. I often wondered if her innocence was a shield, a deliberate choice to remain untouched by the harsher truths that I, in my relentless need to understand, had unearthed. I carried the weight of those truths like a stone in my gut. The discovery, years after their deaths, had been accidental, a chance encounter with a forgotten box of my mother's letters tucked away in the attic. The words on the brittle pages had unraveled a tapestry of pain I never knew existed. It was there, in the faded ink, that I learned the unthinkable. Our grandfather, a man I barely remembered, a specter from a distant past, had committed an act of unspeakable violation against my biological mother. The revelation sent shockwaves through me, not just for the horror of the act itself, but for the devastating implications it held for my sister and me. The letters spoke of a pregnancy, then another, mine, conceived only 3 months after Enya's birth. A timeline so compressed, so fraught with uncertainty, it made my head spin. The stark reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. Enya might not be our father's daughter. She might be his. The drug use, my own premature birth, the near-fatal struggle for my life. It all began to coalesce into a horrifying, fragmented narrative. I was born early, a tiny, fragile being fighting for every breath, a direct consequence of my mother's desperate attempts to numb a pain I was only just beginning to comprehend. Enya, born in January, and I, in November of the same year, were two impossibly close constellations in our mother's tumultuous sky, each a product of a life lived on the precipice. The truth, once unearthed, became a heavy burden, a secret that pressed down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. My first instinct, a primal urge to protect Enya, was to bury it all again, to let the silence swallow the ugliness. She had already lost so much. Her parents, lost to the insidious grip of addiction, had left an unfillable void. To introduce this new layer of horror, this profound violation that cast a shadow over her very existence, felt like an act of cruelty. Her mental well-being, her fragile peace, was paramount. I saw the way she still flinched at loud noises, the way her eyes would cloud over when a song on the radio stirred a distant memory. She was a survivor, yes, but survival in the aftermath of such profound loss and trauma required a delicate ecosystem of stability, a carefully constructed reality that this truth threatened to shatter. And so, I chose silence. I became the keeper of this devastating secret, a solitary guardian standing between Enya and a truth that felt too destructive to bear. I learned to navigate the world with a smile plastered on my face, my internal landscape a churning storm of guilt, fear, and a profound sense of isolation. This family's secret was a heavyweight, a constant psychological burden that threatened to consume me. Yet, each time I looked at Enya, her innocence a beacon in the dimness of our shared history. I knew I had made the only choice I could. The intergenerational trauma that had plagued our family for so long could not, be passed on through me. Not if I could help it. My coping mechanisms were, I hoped, strong enough to hold this darkness at bay, to allow Enya to live a life unburdened by the sins of the past. The power of sisterhood, I reminded myself, was in protection, in shielding each other from the storms. And this, I knew, was the fiercest storm of all. The world, as I knew it, was a mosaic of scattered pieces, a picture I'd spent 27 years trying to assemble. Each shard, a memory, a feeling, a whispered half-truth, contributed to an image that was becoming increasingly unsettling. My parents, figures shrouded in the haze of their own devastating addiction, were gone. Their absence left a void, but also a strange kind of freedom. The freedom to finally piece together the fractured narrative of our lives. My sister, Alara, was my anchor, my constant. Her laughter, a sound I clung to, was a fragile melody in the often discordant symphony of our existence. It was this fierce, protective love for her that propelled my quest for answers. The catalyst for my relentless pursuit wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a deathbed confession. It was far more mundane, yet infinitely more explosive. I was sorting through a box of my mother's belongings, a task I'd postponed for months, each item a painful reminder of what we had lost. Tucked away in a faded shoebox, beneath yellowed photographs and dried flowers, I found a small, leather-bound diary. My mother's handwriting, once familiar and comforting, now looked like a stranger's scrawl, desperate and hurried. The early entries were filled with the typical anxieties of a young woman, hopes, dreams, the awkwardness of first love. But as I turned the brittle pages, the tone shifted. There were entries filled with a raw, visceral pain that made my stomach clench. She wrote of shame, of fear, of a darkness that had descended upon her, a darkness that originated from a source she never explicitly named but heavily implied. My grandfather, the man who was a distant, stern figure in my childhood, the one my mother spoke of with a strange mixture of reverence and terror, was painted in these pages with a horrifying new dimension. My mother detailed his possessiveness, his controlling nature, and then, in passages that still haunt my waking hours, she described instances of his violating her. The words were stark, unflinching, and utterly devastating. She wrote of feeling trapped, of being unable to escape his grasp. Her youthful innocence systematically eroded. As I read, a cold dread washed over me. The hazy inconsistencies of my family history began to crystallize into a horrifying picture. My sister, Elara, born in January. Me, born in November of the same year. A stark, impossibly short gap between our births. My mother's diary hinted at the desperation of her situation, the rushed circumstances of her pregnancies, the fear that clouded her every decision. Then came the entries that explained the impossible timeline. She wrote of Alara's conception, her fear and confusion surrounding it. She mentioned my grandfather's presence, his insistence on being close. And then, with a crushing finality, she confessed to another pregnancy, conceived only 3 months after Alara's birth. Her words dripped with despair, the agony of a woman trapped in a cycle of abuse and unwanted pregnancies. The implications were stark. Alara might not be my father's daughter. The diary entries painted a picture of my mother's relentless struggle for survival, both physical and emotional. She alluded to her own struggles with substance use as a desperate, albeit destructive, coping mechanism. The drug use, she confessed, began as a way to numb the pain, to escape the unbearable reality of her life. It was a vicious cycle, where the trauma fueled the addiction, and the addiction further isolated her, making escape even more impossible. This explained our chaotic upbringing, the periods of neglect, the constant instability, the looming presence of danger that I, as a child, had only dimly understood. My own birth, I now understood, was a consequence of this cycle. Born prematurely, a frail infant battling for breath, a testament to the destructive path my mother was forced to walk. The near-death experience, a terrifying chapter of my infancy, was not just a medical crisis, but a symptom of the profound damage that had been inflicted upon her. The weight of this revelation was crushing. It wasn't just an abstract historical fact. It was the foundation of my existence, the very definition of my family, that had been built on a bedrock of abuse and deception. My entire understanding of my lineage, of who I was, fractured and splintered. The comfortable narratives I had constructed about my parents, about our family, dissolved, replaced by a stark, unforgiving reality. I sat there for hours, the diary clutched in my trembling hands, the silence of the room amplifying the turmoil raging within me. Tears streamed down my face, hot and relentless. Tears of grief for my mother, for the innocence stolen from her, for the life she could have had. Tears of confusion and anger at my grandfather, a man I now saw as a monster hidden in plain sight. And tears of profound sorrow for Alara, my bright, beautiful sister, who was unknowingly living a life built on a foundation of such profound darkness. The immediate, overwhelming instinct was to run to Alara, to hold her, to somehow undo the past. But as the shock began to recede, a chilling thought took its place. Alara, how would she react? She was already so fragile, so susceptible to emotional distress. The news of her grandfather's horrific actions, the uncertainty surrounding her paternity, the knowledge of her mother's deep suffering, would it destroy her? Would it shatter the fragile peace she had managed to carve out for herself? My mother's diary was not just a record of her pain. It was also a testament to her fierce, unwavering love for her daughters. Despite everything, she had tried to protect us, to shield us from the harshest realities. Her silence, her own coping mechanisms, had been her way of navigating an impossible situation. Now, I was faced with the same impossible choice: to reveal the truth and risk devastating my sister, or to carry this burden alone, perpetuating the cycle of silence. The weight of that decision settled upon me, heavy and suffocating, marking the beginning of a new and terrifying chapter in my life. The secret had been unearthed, and its consequences were already beginning to unravel my world. The truth, I was learning, was a double-edged sword, capable of both liberation and utter destruction. The knowledge settled in my bones like a persistent chill. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic revelation, but a slow, insidious creep of understanding that began to reshape the landscape of my past and cast a long shadow over my present. The whispers I dismissed as mere gossip or family lore now coalesced into a stark, undeniable truth. My grandfather, the man whose memory I'd held in a certain, albeit complex, reverence, was a predator. He had violated my biological mother, a profound betrayal that had reverberated through generations, leaving a legacy of pain and uncertainty. This was the core of it, the agonizing truth that I could no longer deny. The paternity of my sister was a question mark, an agonizing ambiguity that hung heavy in the air. Was she my grandfather's child, a product of his monstrous act? Or was she my father's, a testament to a love that had been tragically intertwined with unspeakable abuse? The thought was a sickening vortex, pulling me into a despair I had never known. My own existence suddenly felt tainted, born from a lineage steeped in violation and secrecy. The immediate aftermath of this realization was a paralyzing fear for my sister. She was, and had always been, my anchor, my closest confidant, the one person who had navigated the turbulent waters of our lives with me. To think that she might be the living embodiment of such a horrific act, a constant, tangible reminder of her own grandfather's depravity, was unbearable. My mind, already reeling from the revelation, began to construct a wall of protection around her. She was fragile, her life already marked by the tragic loss of our parents to the ravages of addiction. The intergenerational trauma that had already shaped our family was a heavy burden, and I feared this new knowledge would shatter her completely. I found myself wrestling with an ethical tightrope. The truth, raw and brutal, demanded to be acknowledged, to be spoken. Yet, every fiber of my being screamed against it. What would it achieve? Would it bring solace, or would it unleash a torrent of pain, shattering the fragile peace she had managed to build? The impact of parental substance abuse on our lives had been devastating, leaving deep scars that were still healing. Adding this layer of trauma, this betrayal by a figure of presumed authority and protection, felt like pouring salt into an open wound. The psychological consequences of child sexual abuse are far-reaching and can manifest in numerous ways, including anxiety disorders, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD). I couldn't bear to inflict that on my sister. My days became a careful dance around the truth. Every interaction with her was tinged with a new layer of protectiveness, a desperate attempt to shield her from a reality I was still struggling to comprehend myself. I found myself observing her more closely, searching for any sign that she might already suspect, or worse, that she might be experiencing the echoes of this intergenerational trauma in subtle, unconscious ways. The effects of drug addiction on families are well documented, creating trust issues and emotional distress. We had already lived through so much of that. I couldn't bear to introduce this new, darker chapter. The burden of this knowledge was immense. It sat heavy in my chest, a constant, suffocating presence. Sleep offered little respite, my dreams often fractured and disturbed by disjointed images and a pervasive sense of unease. I found myself retreating inward, my usual openness replaced by a guarded silence. The family secrets that had always been a part of our lives, though perhaps not of this magnitude, had created an atmosphere where genuine communication was often stifled. Now, I was actively contributing to that silence, an architect of the very thing I'd always resented. My coping mechanisms began to shift. If I couldn't share the truth with my sister, I had to find other outlets. I started journaling, pouring my anxieties and fears onto paper, attempting to untangle the knots in my mind. I also found myself drawn to the quiet solace of nature, long walks in the woods becoming a form of meditation, a way to escape the relentless churn of my thoughts. But even in these moments of respite, the secret loomed, an unspoken guest at every turn. The psychological stress associated with addiction in the family can be profound. 5. And carrying such a heavy secret added another layer to that stress. The weight of it all threatened to crush me. I felt isolated, trapped in a labyrinth of my own making. The stigma, shame, and family secrets associated with mental illness in previous generations, which I had only vaguely understood before, now felt acutely relevant to my own situation. 9. I was living a lie, protecting my sister by withholding a truth that, in its own way, was a part of her story. The ethical considerations of family secret disclosure weighed heavily on my conscience. Was my silence truly protecting her, or was it denying her the right to know her own history, however painful? There were moments of intense doubt, where I questioned my own judgment. Was I overreacting? Was this knowledge something she could bear? Perhaps, if I framed it correctly, if I cushioned the blow with enough love and support. But the fear always won. The image of her devastation, the potential unraveling of her already fragile mental state, was too potent. The impact of parental substance abuse on children can lead to mental health disorders such as depression, anxiety, and PTSD. I knew, from firsthand experience, how easily a person's foundation could crumble. The chipped ceramic mug felt warm in Alara's hands, a small anchor in the swirling currents of her inner world. Outside, the morning sun was painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, a stark contrast to the shadows that perpetually lingered in the corners of her mind. Her sister, Maya, hummed a tuneless melody in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes a familiar, comforting rhythm. It was a scene of ordinary domesticity, a carefully constructed diorama that Alara worked tirelessly to maintain. Yet, beneath the surface, a treacherous current pulsed, threatening to unravel the delicate threads of their shared existence. For months now, since the earth-shattering revelation, Alara had lived a double life. To Maya, she was the same sister, the one who had weathered the storm of their parents' demise, the one who was always there, a steadfast presence. But in the quiet hours, when Maya slept, Alara wrestled with the monumental burden of her knowledge. The words spoken in hushed tones, the fragmented pieces of a family history she never knew existed, echoed relentlessly. Her grandfather's heinous act, the dark secret that cast a long shadow over their lineage, and the subsequent uncertainty surrounding Maya's paternity. These were truths that gnawed at Alara's conscience, a constant, unseen ache. She watched Maya now, her sister's bright, unburdened laughter ringing through the small apartment. Maya, with her easy smile and her resilient spirit, was a testament to their shared survival. Alara felt a fierce, protective love for her, a love that had only intensified with the knowledge of the potential genetic inheritance and the traumatic origins of their family. This love was the primary reason Alara clung to her silence. To shatter Maya's perceived reality, to introduce the taint of incest and the cruelty of her own grandfather, felt like a betrayal of that very love. Would it help Maya, who had already endured so much loss, to carry this additional psychological trauma? Alara's gut screamed no. The potential fallout was too immense, the risk to Maya's delicate mental stability too great. Alara poured herself another cup of coffee, the bitterness a welcome sensation. She remembered the day she'd found the old shoebox, tucked away in the attic of their childhood home. It was filled with faded photographs and brittle letters. Amidst the mundane mementos of their parents' lives, a series of unsent letters from her grandmother had surfaced, her shaky handwriting a testament to her distress. They spoke of fear, of shame, and alluded to a terrible transgression that had occurred years before Alara was born. It had taken weeks of piecing together cryptic phrases, cross-referencing dates, and a gut-wrenching conversation with a distant, guilt-ridden aunt for the full, horrifying picture to emerge. The consequences of that act were not just emotional, they were biological, etched into the very DNA of their family. Now, every interaction with Maya was fraught with a subtle tension. Alara found herself overcompensating, showering Maya with affection, trying to imbue their days with as much joy as possible. She'd subtly steer conversations away from family history, deflecting questions about grandparents Maya had never known. The foundation of their family narrative was a carefully constructed lie, and Alara was its sole architect and guardian. Sometimes, Maya would notice. "You seem distant, Alara," she'd say, her brow furrowed with concern. "Is everything okay? You're always so worried." Alara would force a smile, a practiced contortion of her features. "Just tired, May. You know, work. And I miss Mom and Dad." The words felt hollow, a pale imitation of the truth that lay buried deep within her. She longed to confide in Maya, to share the immense weight that pressed down on her, but the fear was a visceral, paralyzing force. She saw Maya's vulnerability, the fragile threads of her emotional well-being, and knew she couldn't risk snapping them. The intergenerational trauma was a palpable presence in their lives, even if Maya didn't have the words to name it. Alara recognized the echoes of her grandmother's anxieties in her own mother's struggles with addiction, and now, in her own hypervigilance. She worried about Maya, about the potential for Maya to inherit not just a complicated past, but also predispositions to certain struggles. The uncertainty of Maya's true parentage was a constant, agonizing question mark, a biological riddle that Alara felt uniquely unqualified to solve, especially when the answer was steeped in such profound violation. She tried to focus on the present, on building a future that was brighter, more stable than the past their parents had left behind. She'd taken steps towards a healthier lifestyle, attending support groups, trying to process her own grief and trauma. But the knowledge of Maya's origins was a thorny branch that pricked at her conscience, a constant reminder of the ethical complexities of their shared life. One evening, while Maya was out with friends, Alara found herself staring at an old photograph of her grandfather. His stern, unsmiling face seemed to bore into her, a silent accuser. She traced the lines of his jaw, a jaw that might have been Maya's. A wave of nausea washed over her. This man, her grandfather, was responsible for a chain of suffering that had reached across decades. And the secret of his actions was now her cross to bear, a lonely vigil she kept to protect the one person she loved most. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, trying to find solace in the silence, a silence that was both her shield and her prison. The fragile peace she had cultivated was a testament to her love, but it was also a constant, agonizing reminder of the truth she held captive. The weight of the discovered truth settled upon Alara like a suffocating shroud. It wasn't just the knowledge of her grandfather's horrific act, or the gnawing uncertainty about Enya's paternity. It was the profound realization of how deeply intertwined these events were with the very fabric of their lives. Intergenerational trauma, a concept she'd only encountered in academic texts, was no longer an abstract idea. It was the unspoken language of her family, a legacy of pain passed down through generations. Alara found herself scrutinizing every memory, every shared glance with Enya, searching for echoes of this hidden trauma. The volatile relationship between her parents, their constant struggles with substance abuse, and their premature deaths. These were not isolated incidents. They were, she now understood, perhaps the most visible symptoms of a deeper, inherited wound. Her mother, a victim of her own father's brutality, had likely carried the burden of that trauma, a burden she'd been unable to shed, leading her down a path of destructive addiction that ultimately claimed her life. 9, 10, and Enya, her sweet, innocent Enya, had been born into this turbulent environment, her very existence a consequence of a past shrouded in darkness. The impact of parental substance abuse on children was a subject Alara had researched extensively in her quest for answers. She knew that children of addicted parents were at a significantly higher risk for emotional, social, and behavioral problems. They often experienced emotional neglect due to parents being preoccupied with their addiction, leading to difficulties in forming secure attachments and developing healthy emotional regulation. This resonated deeply with Alara's own childhood memories, a blur of instability, broken promises, and a pervasive sense of loneliness. She remembered her mother's moments of lucidity, often followed by periods of absence and unreliability, leaving Alara to navigate her young world largely on her own, and often Enya's. Alara began to see how the family dynamics within their home had been warped by the ongoing addiction and the underlying trauma. There was an unspoken agreement to maintain a facade of normalcy, a desperate attempt to shield themselves from the harsh realities of their lives. This created an environment of secrecy, a hallmark of families grappling with addiction and trauma, where open communication was often stifled by fear and shame. Alara recalled hushed arguments, doors abruptly slammed shut, and the constant tension that permeated their home. She remembered her mother's desperate attempts to appear normal when certain relatives visited, a performance that always left Alara feeling more unsettled than reassured. This family secret, the truth about Enya's paternity, felt like the apex of this hidden legacy. Alara's decision to withhold this information from Enya stemmed from a place of fierce, protective love. She had witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of emotional instability. Enya, despite her resilience, was still fragile, her mental stability a constant concern for Alara. The thought of shattering Enya's perception of their family, of introducing such profound doubt and pain, felt like an unbearable cruelty. At 17, she feared that the revelation could push Enya into a downward spiral of anxiety and depression, mirroring the struggles of their own mother. But the weight of the secret was immense. Alara found herself experiencing anxiety and guilt herself, a constant hum beneath the surface of her daily life. She worried that her silence was a form of betrayal, that she was perpetuating a cycle of deception that had already caused so much damage. She researched coping mechanisms for inherited trauma, desperate for a way to manage the emotional burden without breaking her resolve to protect Enya. Mindfulness, journaling, even gentle exercise. She tried them all, seeking a semblance of peace, a way to process the complex emotions swirling within her. She observed Enya more closely than ever, searching for signs of distress that might indicate the trauma was manifesting in ways Alara hadn't anticipated. Were Enya's occasional bouts of melancholy, her sometimes unexplained anxiety, echoes of the trauma she carried within her bloodline? Alara recognized some of the symptoms of intergenerational trauma in herself as well. A tendency towards hypervigilance, a deep-seated distrust of authority figures, and a quiet fear of abandonment. It was a difficult realization, acknowledging that the effects of parental substance abuse and the trauma it stemmed from had likely shaped her own perceptions and behaviors. Alara understood that breaking the cycle of intergenerational trauma required more than just personal healing. It demanded a conscious effort to create a different future for Enya. She resolved to be the anchor Enya needed, the steady presence in her life that their mother, caught in the grip of her own demons, had struggled to be. This chapter was about the insidious, pervasive nature of inherited pain, the way it could manifest in seemingly ordinary lives, and the fierce determination of one sister to shield another from its most devastating effects, even at the cost of her own peace. The secret was a physical entity now, a cold, dense weight settled in the narrator's chest, pressing down on her lungs, making each breath a conscious effort. It wasn't just a piece of information. It was a living, breathing thing that had taken up residence within her, dictating her moods, her interactions, her very perception of the world. The emotional toll of keeping secrets was far greater than she had ever imagined, a relentless drain on her energy and spirit. She found herself replaying conversations, dissecting glances, searching for hidden meanings that weren't there. Every casual remark from her sister felt loaded, every shared memory tainted by the knowledge of what lay beneath the surface. This constant rumination on secrets was exhausting. Sleep offered little respite, her dreams often a chaotic jumble of fragmented memories and anxieties, leaving her more tired than refreshed. The psychological landscape of secrecy was proving to be a treacherous terrain, and she was lost within it. Her relationships, once a source of comfort, now felt fraught with tension. How could she truly connect with anyone when a fundamental truth about her family's history remained hidden? The isolation caused by secrets was profound. She felt like she was living a double life, presenting a composed exterior while internally battling a storm of guilt, fear, and sorrow. The burden of keeping a secret made her withdrawn, less present in conversations, and more prone to snapping at loved ones who, unknowingly, nudged too close to the unspoken truth. She noticed subtle changes in herself. Her anxiety levels were through the roof. Headaches became a frequent companion, and a persistent knot in her stomach was a constant reminder of the stress-related consequences of her silent burden. There were days when the cognitive strain of constantly monitoring her words and actions felt overwhelming. Her focus wavered, and simple tasks seemed to require Herculean effort. The mental distraction was pervasive, a constant hum beneath the surface of her daily life. She tried to rationalize her silence. It was for her sister's protection, wasn't it? To preserve her sister's mental stability, to shield her from a truth that could shatter her world. This justification, however, offered little solace. The guilt and shame gnawed at her, fueled by the knowledge that she was complicit in maintaining a deception, even if her intentions were to protect. The weight of family secrets felt immeasurable, and she was the sole carrier. There were moments of intense longing to confide in someone, to unburden herself of this crushing secret. She'd scroll through her contacts, her finger hovering over names of friends, but the fear always held her back. Fear of judgment, fear of disbelief, fear of the cascade of questions she wouldn't be able to answer. She imagined the looks of shock, the pitying glances, the potential for the secret to spread like wildfire, reaching her sister before she was ready, or perhaps never reaching her in a way that allowed for controlled processing. The fear of people learning about sensitive aspects of her family history, even if it wasn't directly her own secret, was paralyzing. She started to question her own sanity. Was she overreacting? Was the secret as destructive as she felt it to be? She reread articles online, searching for validation, for a roadmap through this emotional wilderness. The research confirmed her fears. Keeping secrets can lead to psychological distress, social isolation, and even physical symptoms. 6. It highlighted how secrets related to trauma or abuse can have a more significant impact on mental health. The lack of social support, 4, became a glaring issue. While she had a support system in place for the loss of her parents, this particular burden felt too heavy, too unique to share. She couldn't explain the full depth of her turmoil without revealing the secret itself. This created a unique form of loneliness, a feeling of being utterly alone in her struggle, even when surrounded by people. She found herself avoiding social situations, the effort of maintaining the facade becoming too much. The emotional distance she felt from others was palpable, a chasm widening with each passing day. She remembered instances where families fractured due to family secrets, leading to suspicion and resentment. The thought of her family's fragile peace shattering was a constant source of dread. She understood the motivations for secrecy, the desire to protect, the shame, the fear of judgment. But understanding didn't alleviate the pain. The weight of unspoken words was crushing her spirit. The physical toll of keeping secrets was also becoming undeniable. The chronic stress had likely begun to manifest in tangible ways, weakening her immune system, disrupting her sleep, and impacting her overall physical health. She recognized the danger of turning to unhealthy coping mechanisms, like alcohol or substance abuse, something she desperately wanted to avoid, given her parents' history. She knew, intellectually, that disclosure could be liberating. The idea of sharing her burden with a trusted confidant, a therapist perhaps, flickered in her mind. But the risks felt immense. The ethical dilemmas were complex. Was her sister's potential peace worth her own prolonged suffering? Or was her own well-being secondary to the potential fragility of her sister's mental state? This chapter was a testament to the corrosive power of secrets. It was about the quiet battles fought within, the emotional strain that seeped into every aspect of life, and the pervasive mental burdens that secrets imposed. It was the chapter where the weight of the unspoken became almost unbearable, a suffocating presence that threatened to consume her. The need for connection warred with the fear of exposure, leaving her in a state of profound internal conflict. The relentless weight of the secret had, for years, felt like a physical entity, an invisible shroud clinging to my every breath. It was a constant hum beneath the surface of my life, a dissonant chord disrupting the melody of normalcy I desperately tried to orchestrate. But lately, something had begun to shift. It wasn't a sudden revelation or a dramatic breakthrough, but a subtle, almost imperceptible loosening of the shroud's grip. This was the genesis of hope, a fragile sprout pushing through the hardened earth of my past trauma. My initial foray into therapy had been born out of sheer desperation. The sleepless nights, the gnawing anxiety, the feeling of being fundamentally broken, these were the cracks that finally forced me to seek external help. My therapist, Dr. Enya Sharma, possessed a calm, steady presence that, paradoxically, felt more grounding than any attempt at forced positivity. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. Instead, she created a safe space where the rawest, most painful truths could be acknowledged without judgment. In those early sessions, I found myself circling the periphery of the truth, a hesitant dancer on the edge of a precipice. I spoke of my parents' drug use, the chaotic upbringing, the gaping holes in my understanding of our family's history. I spoke of my sister, Maya, her precarious mental state, and my fierce, almost suffocating need to protect her. At the core of the secret, the grandfather's transgression and the resulting paternity question remained locked away, a venomous serpent coiled in the deepest chamber of my heart. Dr. Sharma understood. She recognized the intergenerational trauma that permeated our family narrative. She didn't push, but gently guided, her questions like careful probes seeking to understand the architecture of my pain. "It sounds like you've been carrying an immense burden alone," she'd say, her voice soft. "This feeling of responsibility for your sister, it's powerful. But what about your own need for release, for understanding?" Her words resonated. For so long, my entire existence had revolved around safeguarding Maya. Her well-being had become the compass by which I navigated my own life, often at the expense of my own emotional well-being. I had become so adept at suppressing my own needs, my own pain, that I barely recognized them when they surfaced. The constant vigilance, the hyper-awareness of Maya's moods, the preemptive soothing of potential anxieties, it was an exhausting performance. One session, after a particularly difficult week where Maya had been struggling with increased anxiety, I arrived at Dr. Sharma's office feeling utterly depleted. I'd spent the weekend walking on eggshells, monitoring every word, every gesture, terrified of triggering her. As I recounted the events, my voice cracked. "I feel like I'm drowning, Enya," I confessed, the tears finally spilling over. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when I'm falling apart inside." Dr. Sharma listened patiently, her gaze unwavering. When I finally quieted, she said, "You are not responsible for Maya's entire emotional landscape. You can be a source of support, of love, but you cannot be her sole anchor. And you cannot continue to sacrifice your own mental health in the process. This is where self-care ceases to be a luxury and becomes a necessity." Her words were a revelation. The concept of prioritizing my own mental health felt almost alien, a selfish indulgence I couldn't afford. But Dr. Sharma framed it differently, as a prerequisite for truly being there for Maya. If you are depleted, if you are consumed by your own unresolved pain, how can you offer Maya the steady presence she needs? She asked. Healing is not about erasing the past, but about integrating it in a way that allows you to move forward with strength. This marked a turning point. I began to consciously implement small acts of self-care. It started with something as simple as taking 15 minutes each morning to sit with a cup of tea, without distractions, just to breathe. I started reading books that weren't related to survival or coping mechanisms, but pure escapism. I even tentatively reconnected with old friends, people who knew me before the weight of the secret had become so immense. These were small steps, but they felt monumental. Each act of self-nurturing was a quiet defiance against the narrative of my own neglect. The process of emotional processing was not linear. There were days when the old anxieties would surge, threatening to pull me back into the familiar depths of despair. The fear of Maya discovering the truth would resurface with a vengeance, accompanied by crushing guilt. During these times, Dr. Sharma helped me explore the concept of resilience. She explained that resilience wasn't the absence of pain, but the ability to bounce back from adversity, to learn and grow from difficult experiences. "Think of it like a tree," she explained one afternoon. "A strong tree can bend in the wind without breaking. Its roots run deep, providing stability even in a storm. Your experiences have tested you, but they have also, in a way, strengthened your roots. You are capable of weathering this storm. This analogy began to shift my perspective. Instead of viewing myself as a victim of circumstance, I started to see myself as a survivor. The trauma I had endured, the difficult circumstances of my birth, the loss of my parents, these were undeniable parts of my story, but they did not define my entire being. I had agency. I had the capacity to heal. A crucial element in my healing journey was the exploration of boundaries. I realized that my intense protectiveness of Maya, while born of love, had also created an unhealthy codependency. I had blurred the lines between being a supportive sister and an enabler of her anxieties. Dr. Sharma helped me understand that setting healthy boundaries was not an act of rejection, but an act of self-preservation and, ultimately, a more authentic form of support. It meant learning to say no when I was overextended, to encourage Maya to develop her own coping mechanisms, and to allow her to experience discomfort without immediately rushing in to fix it. This was incredibly difficult, challenging years of ingrained behavior, but it was essential for both of our personal growth. As I delved deeper into my own psychoanalysis, the idea of confronting the secret began to feel less like a catastrophic event and more like a potential, albeit terrifying, path toward true integration. I hadn't reached that point yet, not by a long shot. The thought of Maya's reaction still sent shivers down my spine, but the absolute terror had begun to recede, replaced by a cautious curiosity. What if, one day, I found a way to navigate this with her, not necessarily revealing the full, raw truth, but creating an atmosphere where honesty, even about difficult things, was possible? My healing wasn't about forgetting my family history, or even about forgiving those who had caused pain. It was about reclaiming my own narrative. It was about understanding that while my past had shaped me, it did not have to dictate my future. The childhood trauma I had experienced, the difficult circumstances of my birth, the impact of parental addiction, these were threads woven into the tapestry of my life. But I was slowly learning to pick up the needle and add new, vibrant colors. The psychological healing process was arduous, marked by setbacks and moments of profound doubt. But woven through it all was a growing sense of self-compassion. I was learning to be kinder to myself, to acknowledge my struggles without judgment, and to celebrate the small victories. The glimmer of hope that had first appeared was no longer a fleeting spark, but a steadier, warmer light, illuminating the path toward a future where I could embrace my story, with all its complexities and pain, and still find the strength to live fully and authentically. I was beginning to understand that inner peace was not about erasing the past, but about finding a way to live with it, and to build a life that was, in its own way, beautiful and whole. This newfound strength, this burgeoning mental fortitude, was the most precious gift I could give myself. And, in time, perhaps even a more robust gift to Maya. The weight of unspoken truths had settled upon Alara's shoulders like a shroud, a constant companion woven into the fabric of her existence. For years, she had walked a tightrope, her every step calculated to protect her sister, Maya, from a reality that threatened to shatter her world. Now, standing at the precipice of her own healing, Alara faced the final, most agonizing decision: whether to maintain the veil of silence or to risk everything by revealing the devastating secret of their shared, yet complicated, lineage. The past, a tempestuous sea of trauma and betrayal, had shaped them, but the future, Alara vowed, would be guided by a different compass, one of resilience, love, and the unwavering strength of their sisterhood. The journey to this point had been arduous, a solitary odyssey through the labyrinth of her family's pain. Her parents, consumed by the demons of addiction, had left behind a legacy of heartache and unanswered questions. Alara, having unearthed the chilling truth about her grandfather's heinous act and the subsequent uncertainty surrounding Maya's paternity, had been forced to bear the burden of this devastating knowledge alone. The nearly fatal complications of her own premature birth, a consequence of her mother's drug use, had etched a permanent mark on her life, a stark reminder of the fragility of existence and the destructive power of addiction. Yet, it was the thought of Maya, born just months before her in the same tumultuous year, who remained Alara's primary concern. Maya, blissfully unaware of the shadows that stretched long behind their family portrait, represented an innocence Alara desperately sought to preserve. Their bond, forged in the crucible of shared loss and a profound sense of mutual reliance, was a sanctuary, a testament to the enduring power of love in the face of unimaginable adversity. Alara had poured her energy into creating a stable, nurturing environment for Maya, shielding her from the harsh realities that had defined their own upbringing. She had been Maya's rock, her confidant, her everything, all while wrestling with the suffocating secret that threatened to consume her. The decision to keep Maya in the dark was not made lightly. Alara had spent countless nights agonizing over the potential fallout. Would the truth crush Maya's spirit, sending her spiraling into a darkness from which there was no return? The thought of inflicting such pain was unbearable. Alara had witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of addiction and trauma. She understood the fragility of the human psyche. To expose Maya to the agonizing truth about her grandfather's depravity and the lingering doubt about her father's biological connection felt akin to a second act of betrayal. Yet, the weight of the secret was becoming increasingly unbearable. It manifested in sleepless nights, a constant knot of anxiety in her stomach, and a pervasive sense of isolation. The inability to share this fundamental aspect of her identity with her closest blood relative created an invisible barrier, a chasm that threatened to widen with each passing year. Alara yearned for true intimacy, for the unburdened connection that comes with shared vulnerability. She had sought solace in therapy, pouring out the years of suppressed pain and confusion to a compassionate professional who helped her understand the complexities of intergenerational trauma and the insidious ways in which family secrets can ripple through generations. Her therapist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, had guided Alara through a process of self-discovery and trauma processing. "Alara," Dr. Reed had said gently, her voice a balm to Alara's frayed nerves, "your desire to protect Maya is noble. But true protection also involves acknowledging the reality of what has happened, even if it's done in a way that honors your sister's capacity for healing." Dr. Reed had introduced Alara to concepts of resilience, emphasizing that acknowledging painful truths, while difficult, could also be a catalyst for profound emotional healing. Alara began to see her own experiences not as mere victimhood, but as a testament to her inner strength. The near-fatal birth, the turbulent childhood, the loss of her parents. These were not just scars, but markers of her survival. She realized that her own mental fortitude had been forged in the fires of adversity. She started to reframe her understanding of her past, seeking not to erase it, but to integrate it into a narrative of empowerment. This shift in perspective allowed her to confront the ethical dilemma surrounding Maya with a clearer vision. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves outside their small apartment blazed in hues of crimson and gold, Alara sat with Maya, their hands intertwined. Maya was recounting a humorous anecdote about her day, her laughter echoing through the room, a sound that always filled Alara with a profound sense of love and gratitude. In that moment, Alara's resolve solidified. She would not shatter Maya's world. She would continue to be her protector, her sister, her friend. But she would also strive to equip Maya with the tools to navigate life's complexities, to build her own resilience, and to find her own path to healing, even without the explicit knowledge of their darkest family secret. Alara decided that instead of directly confronting Maya with the brutal facts, she would subtly weave threads of support and understanding into their lives. She would encourage Maya to explore her own feelings, her own experiences, and to build a strong sense of self-worth independent of their shared past. She would be a constant source of unconditional love and unwavering support, a safe harbor in any storm Maya might face. This was Alara's legacy of love, a promise to safeguard Maya's well-being while simultaneously fostering her emotional intelligence and coping mechanisms. She began incorporating open conversations about mental health awareness into their discussions, sharing articles and resources about stress management and building healthy relationships. She encouraged Maya to pursue her passions, to nurture her self-esteem, and to develop a strong sense of identity. Alara recognized that while she couldn't change the past, she could influence their present and shape a brighter future. She understood the importance of positive reinforcement and empathetic communication in fostering Maya's growth. Alara also committed to continuing her own journey of healing and self-discovery. She understood that her own well-being was intrinsically linked to Maya's. By continuing to process her own trauma, to cultivate mindfulness, and to seek personal growth, she was creating a more stable and supportive environment for both of them. She learned the art of setting healthy boundaries in her own life, ensuring that she wasn't solely defined by the burdens of her past. She realized that while the family history was tragic, it did not have to dictate their destinies. They could choose to break this cycle of pain and create a new narrative, one filled with hope, healing, and unconditional love. Alara embraced the concept of post-traumatic growth, understanding that adversity could, in fact, lead to profound personal transformation. She found strength in the knowledge that she was actively working towards a healthier future for herself and, by extension, for Maya. The secret, though still held close, no longer felt like an insurmountable burden. It had transformed into a solemn responsibility, a reminder of the profound love and protective instinct that drove Alara. She understood that true strength lay not in erasing painful memories, but in learning to live with them, to grow from them, and to use them as a catalyst for building a more resilient and compassionate future. As Alara watched Maya's face light up with joy over a simple shared moment, she felt a profound sense of peace. The sisterly bond was their anchor, their greatest strength. Alara had chosen her path, to be the unwavering guardian of Maya's heart, to nurture her sister's spirit, and to walk beside her, hand in hand, towards a future illuminated by resilience, self-acceptance, and the enduring power of sisterly love. The past was a part of them, but it would not define them. They would forge ahead, not in denial of their history, but in the courageous act of creating a new, brighter story.